Grace be to you and peace from God, our Creator, Redeemer, and life-giving Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Well, I have a confession to make. This Sunday, Sunday of the Transfiguration, is one of my least favorite Sundays on which to preach. It is. And my struggle has to do with trying to make sense out of these biblical texts that don't really seem to make much sense. And we hear these lessons on this Sunday every year, so you think that after 30 years, I might have figured out something to say, which is useful. And hopefully this will be. But if not, I'll have another year to try. For instance, in our Old Testament lesson, I get that Elisha doesn't want Elijah to go. What student wants to see their favorite teacher leave, or to see their mentor move to a different place? Who wants to let go of an intimate relationship when it's still growing and deepening? I get our Old Testament lesson. I especially get that Elisha was ticked off at those other prophets who kept saying to them, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away?" Those other prophets kept butting in. And Elisha said, "Yes, I know, keep silent, because I want to stay with him as long as I can, or at least to receive part of his spirit when he goes." That part makes sense to me. But then there's that wild scene where Elijah takes off his mantle or his cloak and he rolls it up, he strikes the water with it, the waters part, and he and Elisha go across the Jordan to the other side, and all of a sudden, there's this chariot of fire, these fiery horses, and Elijah is taken up by a whirlwind into heaven. This is the stuff of Steven Spielberg movies. Or if not, the stuff of great oratorios like Mendelssohn's Elijah. Lo, there came a fiery chariot with fiery horses, and he went by a whirlwind to heaven. I love that oratorio by Mendelssohn. I almost had Ken trying to sing it for me today, because I learned that early on when I became a Lutheran in the Settle-Up Chorale. That was the Southeastern Delaware District Lutheran Parish Chorale. What a wonderful oratorio. If you don't know Elijah, go onto YouTube and listen to it. It makes sense to me that we should hear and read this strange text from 2 Kings on Transfiguration Sunday, because there are some parallels between what's happening in 2 Kings and what's going on in our gospel lesson. In both cases, we've got teachers and students. Elijah, prophet par excellence, with Elisha, his student. And there's Jesus with his 3 homeboys, Peter, James, and John. Elijah's departure is imminent. And in Jesus' case, his departure, his death is also imminent, even if his disciples are too hard-headed to pay attention. And in both cases, there's really some pretty far-out stuff going on. Elijah has this chariot of fire, these fiery horses. He's taken by a whirlwind into heaven. And there's Jesus standing on a mountain so bright that it's better than any bleach could bleach, and he's talking to people that are dead. This is very strange stuff. You try making sense out of these texts. But maybe there's more to them than meets the eye. Because Transfiguration Sunday, it's a bridge. It's a bridge connecting the season of Epiphany, the season of the brightness of God's revelation in Jesus, to the season of Lent. It's the bridge that joins the season of light to the season when the forces of evil will seek to and eventually succeed Jesus to death, at snuffing out the light. This day is a bridge. Perhaps it's the bridge over the troubled waters of our lives, connecting Jesus' baptism to our baptisms, because we were, after all, baptized into his death. This Sunday is a bridge connecting Jesus' compassionate life to our lives as we are sent by God into the world as God's beloved sons and daughters. Maybe, brothers and sisters, it's not so bad to preach on Transfiguration Sunday, because on this day, God is seeking to bridge the brilliance of God's love shown to us in Jesus on that strange and mysterious mountaintop to the breadth and depth of a love that is willing to come down into the pain and the messiness and the failure of our lives, and to journey with us in our mortality. And all that God asks of us this day is to pay attention, to listen. We're being asked and even commanded to listen to Jesus, to listen to God's claim on our lives, to listen to and learn from him whose willingness to come down and enter into the valley of the shadow of death was for us and for our salvation, as we will say very shortly in the creed. This past Wednesday, I watched a powerful PBS program in which this fabulous doctor and author, Atul Gawande, chronicled the lives of people who were dying from cancer and their relationships with their families and with their doctors. And in this documentary, which was based on his book, Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End, Gawande tells the stories of these patients and what he learned from them and their doctors as they faced end-of-life decisions. Part of what made this movie so poignant was that the doctors treated not just the varied forms of cancer from which these people were dying, but they treated the patients. They treated them as people whose lives mattered. Whose lives mattered as much as the diseases that were killing them. They related to their patients and their families, listening to them and their fears and questions, walking with them through the dying process. On Friday, when I was visiting our dear Millie, who, thank God, is sitting back there today, Millie told me about the difference in the way the ER doctor had treated her, brushing aside her anxiety so that he could do his job, and the way her own doctor treated her, because he listened to her as she was describing what was happening to her and how she was feeling. And it was the same with these doctors that Dr. Gawande interviewed. They listened to their patients. They listened to their families. They made eye contact with them. They listened to how they were struggling and observed whether they faced their illnesses head on or lived with denial. They struggled with how to give them some glimmer of hope, even if it was hope that they knew was not going to bear fruit in terms of extended life. These doctors and nurses and palliative care professionals walked with these people and